You've got the Chiefs and Ravens in week 3, and a game that we might have glanced at on paper before the season, like, okay. Now all of a sudden you're like, man, this could be like the second coming of Chiefs Rams, where you could have one of these shootout type performances where neither defense is that great, and you just see exciting offensive play just series after series after series.
Yeah, the punters might be able to stay home during that game because I think it's just going to be
they could just be inactivated.
Right. Mahomes,
just get another offensive weapon in. Just
450 yards. Lamar Jackson, 300 yards through the air, another 120 on the ground. I'm kind of right there with you. I think that Lamar Jackson has played good football. And yeah, the teams they've played, Arizona and Miami, don't really show you much. But at the same time, Lamar has done it with his legs. And what's impressed me is he has stood there in the pocket at other times and thrown with pretty good accuracy. So for me, looking at what their tight end has brought them, looking at what Hollywood's brought them, Lamar is delivering the football. And I think that's a good change for the Ravens. And I think it shows that John Harbaugh might have been sly as a fox at the end of last year, that he knew something that the rest of us didn't. Now, with Dak Prescott, I think the guy gets unreasonable amount of hate. And I say this as an Eagles fan. As I really take a step back and I look at Dak, and I think on Undisputed this week, actually, they were debating between Skip and Shannon about Dak Prescott because,
well, that's every week.
Yeah, that's of course every week. Yeah. But there are some pretty interesting statistics with Dak that put him in an upper echelon of quarterback in terms of the number of 40+ yard touchdowns he's thrown early in his career. His QBR through the first 40 games of his career is second only to Tom Brady, I believe. His record, he has a winning record, has been to the playoffs. He's doing a lot of things. And one of the things that one of my buddies actually hates about him, but I think is a good quality, is that he's right around that 28 total touchdowns and 3,500 passing yards every year. Now, that's not a lot of yards, but they also haven't had a lot of receivers the past couple of years. Now you're seeing what he can do with Kellen Moore, a new offensive system. This could be Dak's breakout year because he's been steady as you go. His stats really haven't changed the past 3 years. My buddy says that's terrible. He's not getting any better. And I say, why is that terrible? You've got a guy that what he's going to give you year in and year out. And to me, that's worth something. If he's a leader in the locker room, like everyone says he is, and he gives you 3,500 yards and 28 touchdowns, why is that a bad thing? Maybe that's not an Aaron Rodgers stat line, but at the same time, he's winning games just like Aaron Rodgers tries to do sometimes. So I think to me right now, Dak is impressing me the most. He is in that MVP talk right now. I mean, if not leading the MVP conversation right now, I'd have to actually, even as an Eagles fan, go with Dak Prescott as the most impressive story so far in 2019.
Yeah, and the move to get Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator, kind of get this offense into 2019, get more motion, get the ball down the field more, spread things out a little more than we've seen with Dak, seems to really be clicking. Whatever they have going on, that mojo that those two have right now, it seems like the play calling is much, much better than we've seen. And maybe some of that is getting Jason Garrett away from that more, or just getting a younger mind in there that can sit down and talk to Dak. That really seems to be working for them right now. So kudos to Dallas for making that move and giving a young guy a chance, because who would have thought Kellen Moore a couple years ago as the backup would turn out to be this kind of offensive coordinator for them. But that's what's working in these league now. These young guys that aren't afraid to go out and push the envelope, try some different things, bring in some different concepts, than getting all these just vanilla things that have been done year after year after year. It definitely seems to be working in Dallas. So Eric, I have a question not on the sheet for you. I saw this story today as we record the podcast here on Wednesday night. Colin Kaepernick's agent is making phone calls. He's called three different teams now. You've got a lot of teams that are in the need for quarterback. The report is that Kaepernick is willing to be a backup. So with all the teams that are needing quarterback or quarterback depth, do you feel like this is the year that Kaepernick gets a shot in the league? And if it's not, is it just over?
Yes and yes. Look, I mean, we've talked about the fact that this guy hasn't played for a couple of years now. He's been the face of poor me. I'm not on any team, and yet he hasn't played football. So if a team brings him in for a tryout because that's what they want to do, is that okay with me? Sure. You could bring in Colin Kaepernick. You can bring in Joe Namath, you can bring in Justin Gay. I don't care. You can bring in anyone you want for a tryout. So bring him in. But if during the tryout, he shows that he's still a terrible quarterback and he doesn't get on the team, I don't want to hear anything about it. Now, if he does get on the team, fine. I've got no problem with that. But I can't see this guy being satisfied as a backup. Sure, he's going to say that. He's going to say the right things now because it seems like maybe things are drying up a little bit. Things with the whole anthem protest are not as hot of a topic as they used to be. The AFL is done. So what kind of money does this guy have? What kind of money does he need? And how does he keep his face in the limelight? Say the right thing, say you're going to be a backup and go for a tryout. But yeah, I could see it as a possibility because being a quarterback in the NFL is a really, really hard job. And the fact of the matter is there's generally only 32 guys in the nation that can do it well at any one time. If a team thinks that he would add any value and they want to bring him in for a tryout because he's had success in the past, more power to him. Go for it. Go to the tryouts. But if you don't make it, or you do make it and you still suck, I don't want to hear it anymore. That should be the end of it.
My take's the same as it's been since last year. I hope he gets an opportunity because I don't think he's going to be very good, and it's going to close that chapter of the book. Then the excuse obviously will be, well, he's rusty and because people didn't give him a chance. But I still want to see him get on a team, and then I want to see him be able to prove himself. And that'll close the book on this one way or the other, if he was being held back or he's just simply not good enough, because I believe it's the latter. And that whole video of Beckham and him working out and people just like frothing at the mouth. Oh, my God. Did you see how good he looked? Did you see him in his shorts throwing to a guy with absolutely no one on him who's got the best hands in the league? Let me tell you something. If I went out with a film crew and I was throwing the ball to Beckham, you can make a 30-second tape where I would look like John Elway. And the other 90 minutes of me out there would probably be Odell Beckham wanting to kill me because I wasn't even close on my throws. So the whole notion of putting a guy out there with no pads on, no helmet, no line, just throwing routes to a guy doesn't mean he can play quarterback. There's probably thousands of people in your town that can do the same thing. There's a bunch of high school kids that play every Friday night that can go out and do that. That does not mean he can play quarterback. So if he doesn't get a chance this year with as many quarterbacks as we've seen go down and some of the guys teams are relying on, it's over, Eric. He doesn't have to do any more workouts. He can just hang them up because at this point when you have, 25% of the league at least that is in need of quarterback depth, if he doesn't get a call now, it ain't happening, buddy.
Yeah, and I don't remember people fighting this hard for Tim Tebow. That's a whole different topic. But again, I don't recall people being this upset and fighting this hard to see Tim Tebow back in a uniform because they knew he wasn't good enough to play in the NFL. And sometimes you just have to know that somebody just isn't good enough to play in the NFL, no matter what their stance is otherwise. It's an interesting time, and I'm kind of with you. I like your take where, yeah, go out there, see if you can make it. And I don't want to say I'm rooting for him to fail, but I'm rooting for him to fail.
Well, at least you're honest. So, Eric, that's going to wrap us for segment 2. But we need overtime because the NASCAR playoffs kicked off, and it was quite the race in Vegas and quite the race for Kyle Busch. I got a question for Eric in overtime when we come back. It's overtime. Let's talk about the NASCAR playoffs. Eric, there were 16 drivers that started out the playoffs at Las Vegas. I think all 16 of them found trouble at some point in this race, some more than others. Kyle Busch being one of those guys who had trouble throughout this race, bounced it off the fence, found himself 2 laps down, worked himself all the way back on the lead lap, and then somehow ran directly into the back of a lap down car, or a back marker, as they like to be called in the sport, and ruined his comeback, a chance to get into the top 5. That car was a disaster at the end. Kyle Busch, of course, none too pleased at the end of this race, took some shots at those guys saying this is the upper echelon of the sport. We have guys who haven't even won a late model race out there, doesn't know where these guys are going. So Kyle Busch's day, he had the big cushion, Eric, but he definitely cut into it. So do you agree with Kyle Busch's point after the race, or is this just more of Kyle overreacting?
No, I don't think it's him overreacting. And I know I'm a bit of a Kyle Busch fan, and so I try not to be a homer here, but he's a guy that will run fast each and every week, and he is normally up near the top. So it's understandable when a guy is running an odd line, and I'll say odd line because actually he was running the middle of the track at a racetrack that can hold 3 to 4 lines. Yeah, I understand the two cars that were in front of Busch pulled down to the left and went on the low side, and then Kyle continued to approach, and it was like, well, you could almost see the car wiggle to the left, to the right, a little bit of indecision, like, okay, where is this guy going? And the closing rate, because that lapped car was so freaking slow, was too much. Justin, it would be like you running 90 on I-81 to come up to the studio, and a car doing 50 is in the middle lane, and you think he's going to go one way or the other way. And so you're trying to make a decision, but all of a sudden that 40-mile-per-hour gap, it closes very quickly. And to me, that's what it looked like. It looked like just the spotter's trying to help him. He's trying to make a decision, and all of a sudden that gap closes and he's just right into the back of him, which you don't honestly often see lap cars running right in the middle of the racetrack. So there's a number of things in that scenario that just all added up to be a recipe for disaster. Now, I understand his frustration with that because NASCAR has changed throughout the years, and we talk about this quite often, where for the most part, the top 20 guys are really the only people that have a chance week in and week out to take home the checkered flag and win a race. And you could probably pare that down to really the top 10 to 12 guys. Outside of that, there's guys that'll run in the middle of the pack, and then there's about 13 to 14 cars now that are running that slow. And I think for a guy like Kyle Busch, he's dealing with this week in and week out and not really saying anything because some of these guys are getting 4 and 5 and 6 laps down each and every week. And every time the leaders come around, they've got to slice and dice through these slower cars. Now it's not just 1 or 2 or 3 cars running in the back. Justin, you've got Gase and Sorensen and Smithley and Nemechek, McLeod, Yaley, Tift, Castle, LaJoy. Do I need to keep going? And so it's a problem that NASCAR has right now where I understand these guys are trying to make it. They're trying to make a name for themselves with these small teams. And we've seen success stories, and you can't fault the team for being out there. However, you also can't fault the guys that are literally running 20 miles an hour faster when you're talking about a 180-mile racetrack. 20-mile-an-hour difference is a big deal. You can't fault them for having to dodge these guys week in and week out as they lap the field. So I think it goes both ways.
This was on Kyle. I think he made a mistake. He misjudged where the car was going. This was a race where you had these lappers. They were getting caught at a high rate of speed, and you didn't see any other car just flat rear end one of them. So I think Kyle just made an error at that point. He's got to be able to control his car. I didn't see that the 52 drastically changed his line. I think Kyle didn't want to lose the momentum, and he thought that the 52 would look up, see him coming, and just pull down in the middle of the corner. And when he held his line, Kyle never got out of the gas and just ran into him. So I think it was more on Kyle at that point not controlling his car, because from the video that I've seen and watched that replay a number of times, I didn't see that the 52 drastically changed his line. Was he running in the middle of the racetrack? Yes, but he did have the 24 car under him. So it's not like he had a ton of room at that point just to go all the way to the bottom. Kyle, I think, had a lane to the outside, and he, I think, wanted to run that line because he was making up so much ground, and he made an error. And in Kyle Busch fashion, I think he did overreact after the race, and he attacked these guys personally. I agree with what the things they said of like, hey, anytime you want to switch positions, we'll be more than happy to do it for a week. If you want to get in this car and let me get in that car, and we'll see the difference in how we run, we can do that. But unless NASCAR with 15 to go or 20 to go want to just pull all the cars that are 5 laps or over off the racetrack, you're always going to have these issues where lap cars come into play. We've seen it almost all of these races that have a long green flag run. Guys run these lappers down, and with this new package, if they lose a little bit of momentum, it allows the car chasing them to make big runs, and it's been good for the sport. So I don't see NASCAR doing that, Eric, because the lappers have been able to bring a little bit of drama to some of these races. So at this point for me, watching the replay, look, if the 52 had made a big time move and had jumped the car up a lane and Kyle did it, I would be all over them for it. But I felt like they held their line and Kyle wanted them to move. They did, and he rear-ended them, and he ruined his own day.
Yeah, I agree with you. I didn't say that the 52 moved his line. I think he was running an odd line, and maybe that was a surprise to Kyle Busch because, like you said, normally the lap cars will be able to move down. We don't really know because it's happening so fast that Smithley could have looked in his rearview mirror